And we're back. And now we are going to discuss the other 17 amendments Constitution. Some of them are super important, some of them are not. Amendment 11. Judicial power of the United States shall not be construed to extend to any suit in law or equity commenced or prosecuted against one of the United States by citizens of another state or citizens or subjects of any foreign state. This is basically sovereign immunity. I don't want to talk about it too much. Amendment 12. The story behind this is more interesting in the actual amendment. As you probably know, once upon a time, whoever won with the electoral college got the most votes in the electoral college became president. Who came in second became vice president. This changes that and establishes that the president and vice president run together on the same ticket. This was done as a result of the election of 1800, which saw Jefferson and Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr tie in the electoral college, which created a constitutional crisis. Ultimately, they added the 12th Amendment to prevent that from happening again in the future. So this was in 1804. It will be 61 years before we get another amendment after this. But the amendment we get is one of the most important ones. It's neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to its jurisdiction. So no more slavery in the United States. This ends slavery. Worth mentioning, this is the only time or the first time in the Constitution the word slave or slavery appears. It was dealt with, it is mentioned in the Constitution before this, but euphemistically. Persons held in service was the term used. So first time it's actually mentioned, we finally abolish it. So no more slavery. By the way, fun fact, this is not true 100% of the time, but the more words these amendments have, typically the less important they are. The fewer words they have, the more important they are. Not 100% of the time true. 14th Amendment's an exception. This is true of 13th Amendment, though, like one sentence, right? Boom, it matters. This one, somewhat important, not so much. All right, talk about the 14th Amendment. So all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction equal protection of the laws. So basically, any persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. Post-Civil War, this establishes that former slaves are citizens of the United States. Today, it has been interpreted as meaning that if you were born in the United States, you are a U.S. citizen. That is, there's some question about that now, and as I record this, the Supreme Court has yet to rule on this, so we will have to see what they say. As of now, though, it means that if you're born in the United States, you are a U.S. citizen. There's an exception, but it's very minor, which we'll talk about when we talk about civil rights. Or shall any state make or force any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, or shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction equal protection of the laws. What this means, or what this basically does, is it means that the rights listed in the Bill of Rights and throughout the Constitution apply to state governments as well as federal governments. At first, that was not necessarily the case. When the Constitution was ratified, there were still a few states, for example, that had state churches, because the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law. This changes that and basically means that all levels of government have to abide by that. Read all these. 15th Amendment, another important one, only one sentence. The right of citizens to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So African-American men, at least, gained the right to vote. There was a push to include women in here too, but ultimately it didn't go anywhere, didn't make it. So we'll have to wait another 50 years after this before women get the right to vote. But We will get there. So this was 1870 is when this was ratified. It would be 43 years before we get another amendment, but then we get a flurry of them here, the Progressive Era amendments, they're called. 1913, Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes on income from whatever source derived without apportionment among the several states without regard to any census or enumeration. So what does this mean? Basically, we can have an income tax now. Aren't you glad that this one got passed? All right, 17th Amendment. I don't need to read this, but basically we are going to now directly elect senators. No longer are they going to be appointed by state legislatures. They are going to be directly elected. So for most of U.S. history, they were appointed by state legislatures. But as of 1913, they are now directly elected. Amendment 18. After 1 year from the ratification of this article, the manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors within, the importation thereof into, or the exportation thereof from the United States and all territories subject to the jurisdiction thereof for beverage purposes is hereby prohibited. So what does this mean? Prohibition. No more booze in America. So drinking is going to, no more will there ever be any consumption of alcoholic beverages in America up to the present day, right? 19th Amendment. All right, one other one, which is only one sentence long, but one of the most important ones. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. So women gained the right to vote finally in 1920. All right, then we go 12 years. We get Amendment 20, which is for the poster child of ones that don't really matter. Basically, we move inauguration day to January 20th. That's all this is to do that. So not super significant. 21st Amendment, 18th article of amendment to the United States is hereby repealed. So prohibition is repealed. You can drink again. Well, some states will continue to make it illegal, and some localities will too. But federal level prohibition is over. Why? This is 1933. What's going on in 1933, you ask? You may know the Great Depression. The government is broke because everybody is broke. People aren't making money. They can't pay taxes. So people are broke. Government is broke. Well, you know what? We found out in the 1920s and so that, you can make booze illegal, but it doesn't stop people from drinking. So the logic here is, well, people are drinking all this booze anyway. If we just legalize it again, we can tax it and we can get money from that. So ultimately, that's what they decided to do. So experiment with prohibition comes to an end. We then get to the 22nd Amendment, 1951, which is term limits for the president. You can only serve as president for 2 terms and no more than 10 years. Why 10 years? Well, if you're vice president and you assume the presidency with 2 years or less to go in a term, you're eligible for 2 terms of your own. If you assume the presidency with more than 2 years left, then you're only eligible for 1 full term. All right, this is in 1951. This was in response to Franklin Roosevelt, who had served as 12 years as president, had been elected to a 4th term. So if he'd survived, would have served 16 years, possibly longer. He could have ran for a 5th term. Who knows? 23rd Amendment, 1961. Basically, this gives the District of Columbia of votes in the Electoral College. So Electoral College, you have to be a state in order to have electoral votes. So if you live in Puerto Rico, Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands, North Mariana Islands, you do not get to vote on president. You also don't get voting representation in Congress. You get non-voting delegates. District of Columbia, thanks to this amendment, now does get electoral votes for president. They still don't get voting representation in Congress, though. The reason this was passed probably has to do with the civil rights movement. District of Columbia is overwhelmingly African American, so it's a pretty bad look that District of Columbia is effectively disenfranchised. So now they do at least get votes that matter for the presidency. They still don't get, as I said, voting representation in Congress, which is why I think that's still the case. I don't know if it still is, but they used to have on their license plates, it would say taxation without representation. All right, 24th Amendment, also related to the civil rights movement, does away with poll taxes. So you can't require someone to pay a tax in order to vote. 25th Amendment, this codifies the line of succession for the presidency. Not going to read it all. 26th Amendment lowers the voting age to 18. Because 1971, what's going on in 1971? The Vietnam War. 18-year-olds are getting drafted, so seems fair that they should, if they're old enough to get drafted and fight and die for their country, they probably should be given a voice in the government. So ultimately they were. And last but not least, the 27th Amendment. This is the story behind it is more interesting than what it actually does. No law varying the compensation for the services senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened. So when you are elected to Congress, you are paid a salary. That salary cannot change until after the next election. So you see people sometimes on social media say, well, Congress for cutting this and Congress shouldn't be getting paid. Well, Constitution says they have to. Obviously, the idea here is they can't vote to give themselves a raise, but it just says varying compensation. So a pay cut would also be covered here. The story behind this, though, is more so the idea here is if they vote for a pay raise, you can vote them out so they don't benefit from it. Look at this, proposed in 1789, ratified in 1992, so 203 years later. What's the story there? Well, the Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. There were actually 12 proposed amendments, only 10 got ratified. This one was one of the two that did not. And it was pretty much more or less completely forgotten about until the 1980s.